We've all watched the feasts of victory in films, the horns of ale, the celebration, the mountains of gold. But there is a tale that begins when the fires burn down, a tale that is not spoken. It is the tale of the noble women, the queens, the princesses, the chieftains' daughters whose halls have just been taken over. Their destiny was not an afterthought, it was a plan. This is not a tale of romance or rescue. This is of what transpired when the cheering ceased and the actual price of defeat was paid. We will examine 7 of these outcomes. If you appreciate documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our efforts. Also, comment from which city you're listening to this from. This is a researched and documented script based on sources such as the Annals of Ulster and the Lexa Saga. Now to continue the story. Number 1. The Women of Ayr, 821, Irish coast. The annalistic entry is bleak, with the bleak efficiency of a ledger. For 821 it states, Ayr was sacked by the heathen and they took off a large number of women into captivity. Posit today called Howth was an important settlement on a peninsula defending the northern entrance to Dublin Bay. It was a strategic target. The raid was not random. It was a focused capture of resources. And in the 9th century, people were one of the most precious commodities. These enslaved women, ripped of their names and family in a single act of violence, were reclassified under Norse law as thralls. They were at the bottom of society, a property status, not a human one. Their process into bondage commenced on the decks of a long ship packed into the holds like human cargo. The journey itself was a culling process. Only the strongest survived the crossing of the North Atlantic. Their end was probably the thriving Viking port of Dillon, future Dublin, a great slave market in Western Europe. There they would be sorted out, valued and sold. A fit young woman might bring 12 to 20 ounces of silver, a year's production of a small homestead. They were bought by Irish Norse settlers or freighted further to Hedby and Denmark markets, Birka of Sweden, or even traded along the river routes of the Rus into the immense slave economies of the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Their weaving or medicinal skills, previously signs of superior status, now merely drove their price higher. The annals record not a single name. They were a group, a quantity and a record. Their own lives and histories systematically erased and incorporated into the economic machinery of the Viking world, seized, listed, silenced. Number 2. Melora Merkjarten, mid-10th century, Ireland to Iceland. 200 years later, the Icelandic Laxa Saga provides a name for one of these hostages. Melora was the daughter of an Irish king, Merkjarten. Somewhere in the year 956, her life was destroyed by a Viking attack. She was taken captive, transported to Norway, and sold in a busy market. She came into view of Háskuld Dalakollin, an affluent Icelandic chieftain on a trading expedition commissioned by King Håkon of Norway. Háskuld was impressed by her beauty and stature, inquiring from the trader her name. The trader, one Gilly, who was a rust merchant, swore he did not know it. Háskuld paid 3 marks of silver for her, a huge price. 1 mark of silver weighed 8 ounces. So he paid 24 pure ounces of silver, 3 times what a prime milk cow would cost. He purchased her silence too. During the whole trip back to Iceland, and for years subsequently, Melora would not speak. She resided in his hall as a concubine, an ornament, giving birth to a son whom they called Olaf. All even Háskuld took her for a mute. This was her shield, a desperate ploy to maintain some shred of her inner self in a world in which she was otherwise helpless. The fact only emerged inadvertently. One afternoon, Háskuld strolled along a nearby stream outside his farm and listened as Melora spoke with their young son. She was instructing him in her native tongue, Gaelic. The saga accounts her speaking to the boy that his grandfather was Merciarten, king of the Irish. Háskuld accosted her and the entire history of her royal heritage became known. Her position was marginally better within the family, but she was never emancipated. She stayed on in Iceland, a captive princess whose past was revealed by accident. Her son Olaf grew up to become a great chieftain, named Olaf the Peacock for his magnificent attire. He later went over to Ireland with a cargo of merchandise, encountered his grandfather King Merkjarten, and was previously recognized as Irish nobility, but Mora never returned home. She passed away in Iceland, thousands of miles from the kingdom that she was born to rule, purchased, concealed, discovered. Number 3. The Abbeys of Coldingham, 870, coast of Northumbria, Scotland. Autumn 870 saw the great heathen army which had devastated England for 5 years look north. The army was led by the notorious sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, among them Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan. They marched on the monastery at Coldingham, a double monastery of both monks and nuns located on a windswept cliff overlooking the North Sea. The abbess, a woman known to us from later chronicles as Ebba the Younger, knew exactly what was coming. Viking raids on religious houses were notorious not just for plunder and murder, but for the systematic rape of the women inside. This was a fate worse than death, a desecration that in their very religious belief polluted the soul itself. When the Viking army drew near, Ebba had her community assemble in the chapter house. The version reported by the 13th century chronicler Matthew Paris in his Florus Historium is unflinching. She grabbed a razor, and in the presence of all her sisters cut off her nose and upper lip, making her face a bloody mask. She ordered the other nuns to do the same. Make yourselves an object of horror to the lust of the barbarians. They obeyed one by one. When the Vikings eventually broke through the monastery defenses and stormed into the chapter house, they were confronted by no cowering victims, but by an assembly of quietly assembled, deliberately mutilated women. The intruders, foiled of their prize and infuriated by this defiance, were merciless. They blocked the doors, stacked timber up against the stone walls, and set the whole building alight. The abbess and her whole community were burned alive. Their last decision was not life or death, but between two forms of death. They chose the fire. Their bones blended with the ash and charcoal of their home became part of the cliffside soil, burned, buried, unbroken. If you appreciate this type of in-depth documented history, then hit the subscribe button. It's the best one thing you can do to support this channel, and let us know in the comments where you're viewing from. This script draws on sources such as the Chronicle of Matthew Paris and Viking-era settlement archaeological discoveries. Now back to the history. Number 4. The Women of Canterbury. Holiday Centre of Kent, England. For almost 3 years, a great Danish host, led by Thorald the Tall, had been desolating southern England. King Ethelred, the policy of unready to pay increasingly vast amounts of Danegeld had not worked. It merely invited further raids. In September 1011, Thor's troops besieged Canterbury, the ecclesiastical capital of England. For 20 days, it remained impregnable. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says that the defense was stubborn, but that the city was finally betrayed by one of its own, a man named Elfhere, whose life had recently been spared by Archbishop Elia. The Vikings flooded through this gates. The Chronicle is not pleasant reading. They captured the Archbishop Elia and Elf Cafu, the kings Riev and Leoprin, abbats of St. Milders, and Godwin, bishop of Rochester. They took the whole city leadership, secular and religious. They went on to thoroughly pillage the magnificent Cathedral Christ Church and slew most of the inhabitants. But the aristocratic women such as Elf Cafu and Abbas Leoprin were not slain. They were worth too much. They were taken as hostages, pawns in a cruel game. The troops kept them under captivity for months. Archbishop Elia would not have a ransom paid for him, famously stating that he would not have his freedom purchased with church funds. In April 1012, at a drunken banquet in Greenwich, the frustrated Vikings threw animal bones at him before one of them finally ended him with an axe blow to the head. He was martyred. Their destiny was more subdued, but no less chilling. They were included in the cost of peace. The next year, a huge 48,000 pieces of silver was paid to Thor's army to depart. The liberty of those high-status women was very likely included in that deal. Their lives itemized on a line in a national ransom. They were pawns in the greatest game of their generation. Their survival at the mercy of the weight of silver and the caprice of their captors. Captured, ransomed, erased. Number 5. Dumbarton Rock Captives. 870. Kingdom of Strathclyde, Scotland. While Halfdan and Ivar's army reduced monasteries to ashes in the east, another Viking army invaded from the west. The leaders were Olaf the White, Norse king of Dublin, and his ally Ivar. Their objective was Alt Clwyd, the Clyde Rock, which today is known as Dumbarton Rock. This virtually unassailable volcanic plug was the capital of ancient Strathclyde Kingdom. For 4 months the fortress resisted a merciless siege. The attackers were unable to climb the rock. Rather, they enclosed it, strangling it of water. The older annals state that after 120 days, the well within the fortress dried up. The defenders, thirsting to death, at last surrendered. What ensued was one of the biggest slave events in the Viking period of Britain. Olaf and Ivar wintered on the Clyde, collecting their booty. In 871, the fleet of 200 ships returned to Dublin, with their holds full of treasure and human spoils. The annals report they returned a great booty in people, Angles, Britain and Picts. The king of Strathclyde, Arthul, was taken prisoner. His wife and other nobly born ladies of the court were reduced to slavery. Arthul himself was subsequently murdered in Dublin, at Olaf's behest. To the women, rank was irrelevant. They were now part of an enormous human cargo, their worth evaluated at the Dublin slave market. Their tale illustrates the magnitude and sophistication of Viking slaving. This was no after effect of a raid. It was the main target. Sieged, thirsted, shipped. Number 6. The Wives of the Settlers. Late 9th century Iceland. Icelandic Land Namabok, or Book of Settlements, explains how the island came to be colonized. It's usually presented as a tale of courageous discoverers yearning for freedom. But the book is also filled with hard facts on how this new society was established. It was established at the cost of stolen women. The story of Ingeman the Old, a Norwegian chieftain, is one such example. Prior to settling in Iceland, his men, including his foster brothers, raided Ireland. The Land Namabok says outright that they came back with prisoners. One of them was an Irish noblewoman by the name of Refgard. She was abducted by a Viking called Eyvindr Sorkvir and made into his wife in the new hard country of Iceland. Another chieftain, Kettle the Foolish, is said to have settled in Kirkabar, but the book cites that since he was a Christian, no heathens would dwell there. His descendants married women of families whose matriarchs were taken Irish women. The stories are verified by genetic evidence. New DNA research indicates that though most Icelandic male settlers had Norse paternal lineage, as many as 63% of the original female settlers had maternal origins in Ireland and Scotland. The arithmetic is merciless. For each chieftain who founded a farm, there were usually women who had been forcibly abducted from their homelands to be unwilling brides and mothers. They were the basis of a new country, a basis established in blood, plundered, shipped, replanted. Number 7. The Lady of the Osenberg Ship, 834. Vestfold, Norway. In 1904, archaeologists digging a giant burial mound along the Oslo Fjord in Norway discovered the most spectacular Viking artifact ever uncovered. The Osberg ship, beautifully preserved in blue clay, the 21 ms. long oak ship, was stunningly decorated, its prow cut into the form of a coiled serpent. Within was a burial room worthy of royalty dated by Denver chronology to summer 834. It was packed with treasures, a luxuriously ornamented wooden cart, 3 ceremonial sledges, beds, chests, tapestries, and the skeletal remains of 15 horses and 4 dogs. 2 skeletons of women remained in the burial room, one of which was an elderly woman between 70–80 years of age. Her bones showed she suffered from advanced cancer, and she was likely a woman of immense power, perhaps a queen or a priestess. For decades, it was assumed the second woman, who was younger, around 50, was her high-ranking servant or companion, who chose to follow her mistress into the afterlife. But modern science tells a potentially much darker story. Genetic testing of the younger woman's mitochondrial DNA identified a rare genetic marker, hapgroup U7, found in Scandinavia very seldom. It is predominantly located near the Black Sea and Iran. This physical clue is a strong indication that she was an outsider imported from a distant place into Norway. Her diet, as revealed by bone isotopes, also indicated a drastic change towards the end of her life to a high-protein diet characteristic of the Norwegian elite, suggesting she hadn't always resided there. The most probable scenario is macabre. She might have been an Eastern noble lady captured in a raid and enslaved in the household of the influential Osberg queen. Her life in Norway was privileged as opposed to a field through, but she was still property. When her mistress passed away, her life was forfeit. She was offered up, possibly willingly as part of the rite, or possibly not, to serve in death as well as she had served in life. The extravagant burial was not hers. It was an indication of her owner's standing. Her being there in that glorious tomb is not a tale of devotion, but of possession, bound, buried, abandoned. The tales don't stop there. Workers constructing a relief road for the 2012 Olympic Games in Dorset, England, discovered in 2009 a mass grave on Ridgeway Hill. There was a pit filled with the remains of 54 young men, all killed between about the year 1000. The corpses had been tipped in, but the 51 skulls were stacked apart to the side. Isotopic analysis of chemical isotopes in their teeth, which capture the geology where one was raised, confirmed that they were all from Scandinavia, one of whom was from north of the Arctic Circle. They were a Viking war band taken prisoner and executed systematically by local Anglo-Saxons. It was a violent act of local resistance, but this sensational discovery of Viking warriors being slain is a deviation in the written record. The chronicles of the time, from the Annals of Ulster to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, are full of scores of entries that talk not of Viking warrior men taken prisoner, but of local women taken prisoner. For each Viking crew that came to grief upon a foreign beach, there were dozens of vessels making their way back home, their holds brimming with human booty. These women were the Viking Age's hidden coinage, the hidden spoils of war, their destinies unrecorded, their names forgotten. Their worth was measured in silver, yet their loss was complete.